there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Rousseau's Social Contract. Today we're looking at book four, continuing book four, the final book of the Social Contract, looking at chapters basically 5, 6, and 7. Which again, this is where he's looking at the institutions that will shape his understanding of what representation democracy is. Using the Roman example, he's turns to Rome in a very positive way. Contrary, I mean, again, this is something that's really contrary. People argue that this was really not really essential to his real argument. His argument's up here, and that what is here is so not that important. But Roger Master makes a very good case that the Roman Republic is not. In other words, he sees that the Roman Republic a kind of ideal for not only represent po- uh, uh, the way political systems and representational government needs must work in this sense. So instead of a radical participation in the government, he has given us a strict. In Rome, he's given us a model. What's so important about the last chapter was his position of the Roman Comitia, but the people. He explained how the Roman Comitia ultimately, how the people, and how the system of dividing the people um, into classes and groups in the different ways they were divided in Roman past led to different structures of different types of political constitutions. From a royal constitution, the royal constitution, to the moderation of the royal constitution, to the aristocratic constitution, to the popular constitution. And now we're going to be looking at the Institute of the popular constitution, which is the idea of the tribunate. Okay, chapter 5. The tribunate. Remember, the tribunate was the tribunes of the people. These were the people's representatives. They had a kind of in Rome. Remember, they had mostly a veto, not a block. They didn't really make legislation per se, but they could, had a role. We'll look into it right here, what he says about it. So let's turn to it. On the tribunate, when an exact proportion cannot be established between the constituent parts of the state, or when the indestructible causes constantly alter the relationship between them, a special magistracy is then instituted, which is not part of the others, which places each terms back in their true relationship, and which creates a link or middle term between the prince and the people, or between the prince and the sovereign, or on or on both sides at once if necessary. Now, what is he saying here? He's saying that if there's not the proportion of, if you cannot get a good proportion between the sovereign and the question of the sovereign and the people, the sovereign will make the people like this. And remember the idea of the problem of size, right? The size of that population, and the relationship between the sovereign and the government, right? The size of the prince. The prince is an agent, an instrument of the executive, right? In terms of the government, in that sense. So the tribunate is kind of a mechanism to either constrain the sovereign. In other words, it's what is it? It's a middle term, he says. It's a middle term that links either between the prince and the people, therefore the prince and the people stops against that, or between the prince and the sovereign, right? Or both sides in that sense. So that's we have to understand this in this way. This body, which I call the tribunate, is the preserver of the laws and of the legislative power. So therefore, the tribunate is both a preserver of the laws and the legislative power. Like he's the middle position here, he says. Sometimes it serves to protect the sovereign against the government, as the tribune of the people did in Rome. Sometimes in other words, it protects the sovereign against the government. So the government incursions on the government, and the thing incursion on the people, right? Sometimes it sustains the government against the people, as in the Council of Ten now, does in Venice, and sometimes it maintains the balance on both sides, as the F4s did in Sparta. Now, again, this is why the F4s are interesting. I'll put my glasses on for a second. In his The Letters from the Mountain, right? Rousseau, sorry, my Montaigne. I said Montaigne and I realized that was mountain. It's letters from the mountain. Um, 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 I think it's letters écrites de la montagne. Rousseau rejects the criticism of the tribunes as the cause of the fall of the Roman Republic, in other words, rejects the criticism of tribunes as the fall of the Roman Republic, adding a reference to the chapter as containing some good maxims as such institution. This is Polite Volume 3. As the examples of the Spartan ephors and the Venetian councils of 10 indicate, Rousseau clearly has in mind a political function that exists in other regimes. One could wonder how he would have analyzed the Supreme Court in this sense. In other words, this idea of mediating function here, that either it is acting on, his example of it, the Roman, it protects the people against the Senate and the or in its instruments of the councils and things like that, or that it protects the government against the people, as the Council of Ten in Venice does, and thus in Sparta the balancing of both sides. Right? It protects it balances out both the senators. The F4s balance out both the government, the prince, the king, and then on the other hand, the people, right? So the tribunate is not a constituted part of the city and should not have any portion of the legislative or executive power. So therefore, it's almost like judicial power, right? It's suggesting it's neither a part of legislative or executive in that sense, right? But it is for this very reason that its own power is great. For though it can do nothing, it can prevent everything. So it's blocking. It blocks. It can do nothing. It is neither legislative or executive. It can never, in other words, it's neither executive nor legislative, but it can block. It is more sacred and revered as a defender of the laws than the prince who executes them and the sovereign who makes them. So again, this is interesting that the tribunate is sacrosanct. It's made and revered because it upholds, it defends. It's the defender of in Schmidt, he would call this the defender of the Constitution in this sense. And I think this is a good, interesting point that in modern liberal thinking, what we've done is the defender of the Constitution, what Schmidt would call the defender of the Constitution, or defender of the laws, right? The upholder and defender of the law, basically the fundamental laws. That this entity upholds, it should uphold the system, and any either the legislature or the executive it becomes a regulator of those two things, right? I think that's a very interesting point that Master hints on the role of the court and the idea of judicial review by the American model as kind of what, this is the modern inversion of the tribute in that sense, right? It restrains it in that sense. So let us continue. It is more sacred defenders of the laws and prince who executes them and the sovereign who makes them, right? So therefore it's both, it has more sacredness and reveredness than both the legislature and the executive. This is clearly seen in Rome, when the proud patricians, who always scorn the entire people, were forced to yield before a simple officer of the people, who had neither auspices nor jurisdiction. So therefore, in other words, the proud patricians had to yield against the thing. But then again, remember, they turned when he was out of office. They would kill. This is what they did against the the what do you call it? The Gracchi, right? The Gracchi in that sense. A wisely tempered tribunate is the firmest support for a good constitution. Very interesting. This is Rousseau's point. Wisely tempered tribunate is the firmest support for the constitution. But if it even has too little, but if it has even a little too much force, it upsets everything. So therefore, this idea, in other words, a tempered one is this. But if the tribunate even has ability to act, force, it upsets everything. Weakness is not its nature, and provided the tribunate counts for something, it will never be less than necessary. So, in other words, it's not a weakness. Weakness that the tribunate is the block to say no. Its sacrosanctness and in its status, it is able to block, right? As long as it has no, in other words, but even if it has too much force, it upsets everything because it's already strong. In other words, if you add force and if you add a element of force to it or power to it, in that sense, if it has the taint of executive authority or the taint of the legislature, if there are any blurring of the tribunate with the executive or the legislative, it's too much power, too much force, and therefore it would accept everything. Weakness, because why? Because in its own self, it is not weak, and provided that the tribute counts for something, right? That is not complete. In other words, is not meaningless. It'll be never less than necessary. It degenerates into tyranny when it usurps the executive. This is the warning. It degenerates into tyranny when it usurps the executive power, of which it is only the moderator, and when it wants to dispense laws, which it should only protect. So, therefore, again, this would be a massive critique of the court. In other words, when the court acts merely as a tribunate entity, then this actually is a very powerful critique. Rousseau here is giving us a very powerful critique of the limits of what we would today call judicial power. Because why? Because if it starts acting too much, it will degenerate into tyranny if it usurps the executive power, and which is supposed to be a moderator, and when it wants to dispense laws, which is only supposed to protect. The vast power of the ephors, which was without danger as long as Sparta preserved its mores, accelerated the corruption once it began. So once corruption began, the ephors became the engine that accelerated corruption, right? The blood of Aegeus, murdered by these tyrants, were revenged by his successor. The crimes and punishments of the ephors equally hastened the downfall of the republic. And after Cleomenes, Sparta was no longer anything, right? Cleomenes, Sparta was never anything. Rome also perished in the same way. But the excessive power that the tributes gradually usurped was finally used, with the help of laws made to protect freedom, as a safeguard for the emperor who destroyed it. Right? This is the emperor used it. The emperor, like Caesar and those guys, used tribunal power as a means to destroy the remaining republic and the remaining element in the city. Right? As for the Council of the Ten in Venice, it is a bloody tribunal, equally horrible for the patricians and the people, and which, far from proudly protecting the laws, now only serves after their debasement for striking shady blows that no one dares notice. The tribunate, like the government, is weakened by the multiplication of its members. So therefore, like government. In other words, if it gets too big, it becomes too weak. In other words, it needs to be the right size based on in order to do it. Too little, too few, too not able to deliver, too big, it becomes overburdened and inefficient, right? So therefore, it depends on the size of the people. The government has to be in relation to the size of the people and ability to deliver the things, and therefore the size of the government is always relevant. Go back to this discussion of government. But here is the tribune is like that, right? There needs, if it's too many, it's weakened by the multiplication of its members. So when the tribune of the Roman people, at first two in number, then five, wanted to double this number, the Senate allowed them to do so, certain that some would restrain others, which is just what happened, right? So therefore, in other words, that as it big up, as it went from two to five and then to 10, right? Then what happened was the idea the Senate agreed to this because they thought that the more would restrain it, right? The best way to prevent usurpations by such a formative body, one that no government has thought up to now, would be not to make this body permanent, but to regulate intervals during which it would be suppressed. So therefore, it's not a permanent body. It comes up and it emerges, it rises. And again, this is the judges. You may be seeing this as the judges in the book in the Bible, in the book Judges, right? Before the rise of the kings in Israel in the New Testament, the Old Testament, sorry, Old Testament, the account of the Noetic regime, and then the rise after Joshua, the account of the judges before, and then the failure breakdown of the judges who emerge as a temporary, but usually one person. The Greek, the Israeli, the case of the Israel was that a judge, God would call a judge, and he would act as this. And it's almost like a dictator in that sense. And Rome, it's like the dictator more than a judge. It's weird in that sense. This is the idea. This is how to understand this. Upholder of the restorer of the laws, right? Therefore, it kind of echoes of a dictator, but no, it's here. He's saying that a tribunate should have what? It should prevent usurpation. If you want to prevent it, it should be able to make this body permanent, but to regulate intervals in which it would be suppressed. These intervals, which should not be long enough to give abuses the time to become established, can be fixed by laws in such a way that easily cut them short. In case of need, by special commissions, right? So therefore, you can make them by shorter. A special commission can make them shorter. Otherwise, intervals by which not long enough to give abuse. But then, I mean, these intervals that they don't exist should not be so long that they're suppressed. Should not be long to allow for the abuses to have to become established, and can be fixed by laws in such a way that easy to cut them short. These things, in case of need, by commissions. So, a commissioner can authorize the reestablishment of tribunals. This method appears to me present. This appears to me to present no difficulty because since the tribunate, as I've said, is not part of the Constitution, it can be removed without doing the Constitution any harm. So it's extra constitutional. It is not either government or legislative. So this is interesting. It's in this sense. It's not a magistrate in this sense. It's not a executive, nor is it a thing. Well, the problem with the idea of judicial power, following Locke and Montesquieu, judicial power seems to be a magistrate. Okay, the only difference in would be the juries in Montesquieu. Montesquieu gives the idea of the judicial power in terms of the jury coming in to do it, the ad hoc creation of a jury in this sense. So is Rousseau maybe this is area maybe Rousseau should have thought out more. Is a jury or is a kind of popular assembly of people to deal with a question, and that they set the question in this sense. So in other words, this method appears to me to present no difficulties because he said that they're not part of the Constitution. It can be removed without doing the Constitution any harm, and it appears effective to me because a newly established magistrate does not start from the power of his predecessor had, but from that given to him by the law. So therefore, in other words, it's not that in other words, because of this mechanism, there's no continuation of office. So it's only the law gives him his power. It's, in other words, not his predecessor. So he's saying this kind of a view that there would be a kind of only temper. There'll be intermissions between it maybe set by law, maybe set by law. 'Cause it's not set up by the Constitution, not by the fundamental constitution of the system, but by need, right? By the need of it. So therefore, it's not a part of the Constitution in that sense, and therefore it can be removed without doing the Constitution any harm. He says, and it appears this idea of this doing it effective because a new magistrate can be brought into being at the start of from power of not from the power of his president, but from the laws in that sense. So therefore, you create them and let them go, create them and let them go, and you can do it through a period of intervals where there's a commission, there's a period no into this or this, or you let it come and go like a dictator in that sense, right? But in fact, this is what leads to this. It's interesting that the next thing he does in chapter 6 is deal with the issue of dictatorship. The inflexibility of laws, which prevents them from adapting to events, can in certain cases make them pernicious and can even cause the downfall of the state during a crisis. Right? Um, okay, I'm not going to. It's a listen note about this. In order for the slowness of formalities, the order and slowness of formalities require a space of time, which circumstances sometimes do not permit. In other words, that the order and slowness of the formalities of state, institutional process requires time that circumstances do not permit. 1,000 situations for which the legislature has made no provision can arise, and it is very necessary. And it is a very necessary foresight to realize that one cannot foresee everything. Right? In other words, you have to realize that the legislature cannot foresee everything. So you have to have a means to deal with the things that you cannot foresee, the unknown unknowns. Remember that famous thing from Donald Rumsfeld: known knowns, known unknowns. What was it? Uh, Things we know that we know, things we know that we don't know, things we don't know that we shouldn't don't know. Right? That's that famous. I forget the whole point about no knowns. Hold on. Yeah, this is that famous line. Famous reports. This is a famous speech that he gave at a press conference in February 12, 2002, right? Reports say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me because we know that there are no knowns. There are things we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns, the ones that we don't know. And if one looks through history of our country and other free countries, it is the latter category that turns out to be the difficult one. Okay, and this is what I was saying here. This is we don't. There are going to be the legislature does not have. It's the unknown unknowns. Okay, that in fact foresight is the known unknowns. Right? We know we don't know. Okay, we know what we know. We know we don't know. That's foresight. That's the realm of foresight. But the limit of foresight is we don't know what we don't. We don't know what we don't know. Right? The unknown unknowns. Right? And I think this is a very important point that Rousseau is pointing up here about the limits of this. He says it is necessary, therefore, not to want to strengthen political institutions to the point of removing the power to suspend their effect. In other words, you don't want to. This again. This is where the successors of Kant. This is where Kant And the children, the neo-Kantians and German thinking, and I'm not even sure, maybe some neo-Hegelians, particularly in the German of the later 19th and early 20th century, the kind of Germanic liberalism, this Germanic jurisprudential liberalism. Somebody like Hans Kelsen too, who will want to make everything norm, make everything done, everything done by the. If it's not done through the institutions, it has no ability. So therefore, does not want to strengthen political institutions to the point of removing the power to suspend their effect. Okay, this is Rousseau's warning against this. Therefore, the modern liberalism of the very late to early 20th century and all through the mid 20th century, the modern liberalism of this sought to constantly normalize. This is Schmitt. This is the warning. In fact, Rousseau and Schmitt agree here. This is the Schmitt's critique of the danger that you need to have. You cannot escape the exception. Because what is the exception? It is the unforeseeable things that produce crisis, that the law and the institutions have not foreseen and have no means to address. Okay, and he says even Sparta let its laws lie dormant in that sense. Okay, this idea, letting its laws lie dormant. But only the greatest dangers can outweigh the dangers of altering the public order. And one should never suspend the sacred powers of the law except when it is a matter of safety of the homeland. So therefore, his argument is that it's in other words, the greatest dangers can outweigh the danger of altering the public order. And while one should never suspend the sacred powers of laws, the exception is the matter of the safety of the homeland. In these rare and manifest cases, a special act provides for public security, placing responsibility for it in the worthy hands. This commission can be given in two ways, according to the type of danger. So, therefore, he says now he addresses this idea that this can be, in other words, in this crisis for the safety of the homeland, if the public safety and security and this needs this, then we have this means. A special act provides for this by placing responsibility in the worthiest hands. He says now this commission be two ways according to the type of danger. One, okay, this is if as a remedy it suffices to increase the activity of government, it is concentrated in one or two of its members. Thus, it is not the authority of the laws that is altered, but merely the form by which they are administered. So, therefore, if we just increase the power, allow existing members to resolve the problem in light of the crisis. Okay, but therefore, we're not changing the law. In other words, it's not the authority of the laws that is altered, but merely the form by which they're administered. If the peril is such that to guard against it, the apparatus of the laws is an obstacle, then a supreme leader is named who silences all laws and momentarily suspends sovereign authority. So therefore, it's interesting now he says here. Now the first mechanism is through just giving more power, giving more authority to the existing one or two members of the government to solve the problem. But he says, okay, then that doesn't alter the existing laws. It just alters the forms by which they do it, right? Administer. However, if the peril is such that to guard against it, in other words, if the laws themselves becomes an obstacle to fight the problem, in other words, if the laws themselves become an obstacle for you to affect in other words, the first way is basically leave the laws as they are and just merely give more power or more authority to those one or two officials to resolve the problem within the framework of the laws. The second is that the laws themselves are an obstacle to resolving the crisis. In other words, that if the peril is such that to guard against it, the apparatus of the law is an obstacle, then what? A supreme leader, one person is named who silences all the laws and momently suspends sovereign authority. That means, in other words, the sovereign itself is handed to him. In other words, he exercises sovereignty. Not the sovereign. The sovereign itself does not speak. He speaks for it and acts for it. In that sense, again, this is something we're looking at in Schmidt. We're looking at Schmidt's book on dictatorship in that sense, right? Which is being read at the same time and parallel to what we're doing in the Rousseau. But it's very interesting. He says that, right? It's um, this is the sovereign. He goes, in such a case, the general will is not in doubt, and it is evident that the first intention of the people is that the state should not perish. So therefore, the general will is not. There's no doubt. In other words, that the suspending of sovereign here is what? Is to preserve the sovereign in that sense. It is to preserve that, because remember, the general will and the sovereign are unified in the sense, and therefore the general will is not in doubt in that, because the general will would want the state to survive, to not perish, that the state the first, in other words, he says, it is evident the first intention of the people is that the state should not perish. In this matter, the suspension of legislative authority does not abolish it. The magistrate who silence it cannot make it speak. He dominates it without being able to represent it. So he's not representing it. He's not making. In other words, he can't make it speak. He just dominates it. It is exercise of just power over it, because its authority has been suspended. It doesn't replace it. He can't act for it. He is acting outside of the laws for the sake of the laws. He can do anything except make laws. Okay? That's the point. He dominates it without representing it. He can do anything except make laws. The first means was used by the Roman Senate when it entrusted the consuls by consecrated formula, which provided for the safety of the republic. So in other words, the normal means was the consuls. The consuls consecrated it to accomplish the necessary means of delivering the safety of the public. The second occurred when one of the two consuls named the dictator, a practice for which Alba set the precedent in Rome. This nomination was made at night and in secret, as though it were shameful to place a man above the laws. So again, this was made at night and in secret, as though it was shameful. Right? This idea that this was something that was, two consuls named the dictator, and the practice at Alba set the precedent. At the beginning of the republic, recourse to dictatorship was taken often, because the state did not yet have a stable enough basis to be able to sustain itself by the force of its constitution. Since the Moors of that period made many precautions superfluous that would have been necessary in other times. In other words, the Moors limited and constrained that. In other words, the Moors made. In other words, when the Moors were weak, then you needed precautions against dictators. But the Moors were strong enough that there was no need for precautions. They were superfluous in that sense. In other words, since the Moors of that period made the precautions superfluous that would have been necessary in other times, there was no fear either that a dictator would abuse his authority or that he would try to keep it beyond his term. In other words, no Roman would think of doing that. The mores of the Roman people were such that it was so powerful, so strong that a Romans would. In other words, this is why only when the Moors were corrupted, when a person may think, well, I want to hold it again, I want to keep it forever. I'm not going to limit myself. I'm going to be, in other words, when there's good mores, the mores are enough to prevent the abuse. But when the mores have been corrupted, then the danger of corruption of this, the danger of corrupting, the more corrupted mores, then you have to regulate. You have to. It's going to be. This is this. The dictator can abuse it, right? It seemed, on contrary, that such a great power was a burden to one in whom it was vested so quickly that he hastened to be rid of it. In other words, as though an office that took the place of the law would have been too painful and too dangerous. Now, given the Moors, right, on the contrary, this was a burden. It was too, in other words, and he wanted to get rid of it because it was shameful in a sense that he was in other words, in other words, that he needed to do these bad things, the things that needed to be done to save the republic, were made and that needed to be contrary to the laws. This was something that the actor themselves thought would be, and the wider Moors would think is problematic, right? So this is why they did it, or to get rid of it, and place of the law. In other words, as an office which that took the place of the laws would have been too painful and too dangerous. Thus, it is not the danger of abuse, but rather of that of debasement, which leads me to blame the indiscriminate use of the supreme magistrate in the early times. In other words, it's not. In other words, it's the in other words, it's not the danger of abuse, but the debasement of that, but rather of that debasement, which leads me to blame the indiscriminate use of the supreme magistrate in early times. For while it was being squandered on elections, dedications, and pure formalities, it was to be feared that it would become less formidable in times of need, and that the people would grow accustomed to consider empty a title that used only the consider empty as a title that used only in empty ceremonies. In other words, this is the danger. Now, if it was used for everything, if you use it to do elections, to deal with the dedications of something or pure formalities, then it would what? It would routinize. They grow accustomed to this empty, a title that really had no power. In other words, this office suspends the law and should be only rose into the deepest of emergencies. So it's the basement of that sense. That's what's wrong with it. Towards the end of the Republic, the Romans, having become more circumspect, used the dictatorship sparingly, with as little reason as they had formerly squandered it. In other words, they became fearful of it, right? In essence, they used it to they used it square. They used it. In other words, in the same way they abused it before, they overused it before, or they now used it. They didn't use it enough. Here, they used it sparingly, with little reason as they had formerly squandered it. It was easy to see that their fear was ill-founded, that the weakness of the capital then guaranteed it against the magistrates in its midst. That a dictator could, in certain situations, defend public freedom without ever being able to threaten it, and that Roman chains would not be forged in Rome itself, but in its armies, right? So it's not the Roman people, it's not this, it's the armies. The feeble resistance of Marius against Sulla and of Pompey against Caesar showed clearly what could be expected if internal authority could be expected of internal authority against external force. In other words, this is the danger. These armies tied to the loyalty of generals. Remember the Marcius reforms. The Marcius reforms allowed that they would hire everyone. They would pay people, including the lowest, right? They were not Roman citizens, and not Remember, the lowest class was not to be soldiers. They were not deemed to be. But now what's happening is that because the soldiers were going to be given pay and paid in this sense, not doing service, then what happened was, and they would hire the poorest people to be in the soldiers, And since it was the general in his conquests would be giving the pay for the soldiers, so the Republic may give him some money, do this, but what happened? The Marius reforms changed it, and because of the instead of money, the loots going back to the money going back to the Senate, the money would be then given to the successful general to pay his soldiers and reward his troops, and therefore they were loyal. That was the danger of the Marius reforms. This error caused them to make great mistakes. For example, not having named a dictator in the Catalan affair, for since it was only a question of the interior of the town, and at the most some provinces in Italy, with the unlimited authority that the laws gave the dictator, he would have easily dissipated the conspiracy, which was suppressed only by the combination of chance factors, which human prudence could never have anticipated. Right, the Catalan affair, the famous Catalan affair, which Cicero was played a role in suppressing in that sense. So they didn't name a dictator. He did it without. He did it. It was a private person using extra forces without dictatorial authority. They did not name a dictator to do it. Right, and it would have been easy if they named a dictator. It would have been easy for do it. Um, if the laws gave the dictator, it would have been easy to spell this, which was suppressed by a combination of chance factors, which human prudence could never anticipate. Instead of that, the Senate was content to place all its power in the councils. Because of this, Cicero, in order to act effectively, was constrained to exceed this power in a certain respect. And although the first explosion of joy gave approval to his conduct, later he was justly called to account for the blood of citizens spilled against the law, a reproach that he could not have been that was, could not have been made to a dictator. In other words, he was criticized. Now Cicero acted privately. Cicero acted. In other words, they trusted that the Senate refused to give a dictator. They let the consuls do it. The consuls weren't effective, and therefore Cicero acted as a private individual to stop to stop this. Right. At first, people praised it, and later they criticized it because why he spilt the blood of citizens against the law. But now the dictator, but now this he could now this is a just reproach under the law of a citizen. But as a dictator, no, the dictator is above. The law does not apply to him. It cannot be made against the dictator. But the council's eloquence carried the day, and since even he, although a Roman, preferred his glory to his homeland, he did not seek the most legitimate and surest way to save the Senate, so much as the way that would bring him the greatest honor from the affair. Right, this is that thing. He could not be certain of, in other words, he could not be certain of this in proposing a dictator, since he did not dare name himself, and he could not be sure that his colleague would name him. So in other words, he wanted to act. In other words, it was his desire for glory in this idea. This is a criticism. Now this is a criticism of this is Rousseau's criticism of him, that what he says, he preferred his glory to his homeland, and he did not seek the most legitimate and surest way to save the state, so much as the way that would bring him the greatest honor for this affair. Thus, he was justly honored as the liberator of Rome and justly punished as a violator of its laws. However brilliant his recall, it is certain that it was a pardon. In other words, however brilliant his recall, it is certain that it was a pardon. In other words, a pardon in the sense. And in any event, no matter how this important commission is conferred, it is important for its duration to be fixed at a very short term, which can never be prolonged. So it cannot be prolonged. It can't be that. It needs to have a short term. It must be prolonged. In the crisis that calls for its establishment, the state should the state is soon destroyed or saved. Once the urgent need is past, the dictatorship becomes tyrannical and useless. In Rome, where the dictator were named for only 6 months, most of them abdicated before this term. If the term had been longer, perhaps they would have been tempted to prolong it further, as did the Decemvirs, with a term of 1 year. The dictator had only the time to attend to the need that led to his. In other words, the dictator had only the time to attend to the need that led to his election. He did not have enough to think of other projects. In other words, he could just do why he was picked to do this. He could solve this, and he didn't have time to fix another problem. So the limited time was the means by which constraining it. And last chapter, chapter 7, which is the censorship, the censor, right? On censorship, right? The censor. Just as the general will is declared by the law, public judgments is declared by the censorship. And this is the censor of Rome. The Roman censor has it. You read it 127. On the Roman censor, see Machiavelli, Titus Litis 1, chapter 40. It says, for it is in the censor became the arbiters Roman customs. They constitute a very powerful instrument which the Romans used in order to postpone the advent of corruption. That's Machiavelli. Now compare Rousseau's explanation of how the censors greatly contributed to upholding Roman government. This is consideration of the Romans, chapter 8. In that. So therefore, this is the comparison what Machiavelli says here, that he's echoing both Machiavelli and the role of the censor in terms of the morals, right? These seems right. Public opinion is a kind of law of which the censor is the minister, and which he only applies to particular situations, following the example of a prince. So he's like a prince, right? He is like a prince, but he's not a prince. His concern is about opinion. Public opinion is a kind of law. So general is declared by the law, right? And public judgments is declared by the censor. So he is the person in this sense who looks at what the laws, what should be the kind of opinion of the people, right? Which he only applies to particular situations, following the example of the prince in that sense, right? Therefore, the censorial tribunal, far from being the arbiter of public opinion, merely declares it. And as soon as this body departs from that opinion, its decisions are useless and ineffective. In other words, he enforces the mores. He enforces the rules. In other words, the mores and the public opinion is about what are the mores, what are the values, what are these things, and therefore the censor, the censorial tribunal, the censor in this one, is the one he just merely declares what the opinion is. It is like the law in that sense. This is and the opinion, people's opinion, and this is tied with the mores, the beliefs, and that stuff, right? And as soon as that body departs from that opinion, its decisions are useless and ineffective. So there must be, in other words, if the second I say something that doesn't agree with what the opinion is, then it becomes ineffective and useless. There is no use in distinguishing between the mores of a nation and the object of its esteem. So 128. The French word translated here as mores means both the moral and manners of a society, that is, customs from a moral as well as descriptive point of view, right? In that sense. So this is the mores in that sense. In other words, there is no use in distinguishing between the mores of a nation and the object of esteem, for all these things stem from the same principle and are necessarily intermingled, in that sense, right? The mores of a nation and the objects of their esteem, these are intermingled. Among all peoples of the world, it is not nature but opinion that determines the choices of their pleasures. So it's not nature, but opinion. In other words, opinion, belief, our beliefs about it. In other words, our beliefs about nature may be there, but it's going to be our beliefs, our opinions about things. The doxa, right, in Greek, the doxa, not the phusis. The phusis is there. The doxa, our belief about nature of things too, in that sense, right? Our opinions about these things. Um, and that opinions determine the choice of their pleasures. Reform men's opinions, and their mores will purify themselves. So you fix their opinions about their beliefs. So there again, this tying of opinions and mores. That, in other words, if you fix their opinions, and their mores will purify themselves, right? So this interconnection between what we believe, our opinions, or what we believe, and our habits. This connection in Rousseau between beliefs and habits, which is a very interesting aspect. That if we don't reform, in other words, if we don't shape, if our opinions are led or not led and misled, then that will corrupt our mores. That could corrupt our mores, because there's a connection between our opinions and our mores. So therefore, if you want to fix the mores, you address opinions. You fix opinions. This is very much tied to the way modern, that we say, I mean, and actually, this is where Rousseau becomes more like, um, this is where Rousseau is talking about this is interesting, because it seems to be that for Rousseau, that its opinions and these opinions become more powerful than the more habits. It's the beliefs and the opinions about things that become the engine by which really shapes mores in that sense, or changes them or brews them. This is a very and I think this is something that he deals with, the role of in his first, I think both in the first and second discourse is something he talks about the role of vanity and this stuff. We talked about this earlier regarding luxury, how luxury leads to vanity, and this is a problem in that sense, and it leads to danger of that, that people who have enough, or just, if you have too much, wealth, you become too centered, you become more egotistical, more vain in this sense, and it corrupts the mores, right? Well, here, this is what the opinion in the sense, this is the role of this. One always likes what is beautiful, or what is thought to be so, but it is this judgment that makes it that may be mistaken. So therefore, this is the idea: what is beautiful, what we think so, but it is this judgment, what we think thought to be so. In other words, that is this the beautiful. In other words, this judgment may be mistaken. Therefore, the problem is to regulate this judgment. So, what is the beautiful? What is the good? What is the beautiful? Is this really beautiful? And therefore, regulating opinion in a sense. And here, as we can see a little bit. This is where Rousseau would not be an absolute free speech person in that sense. At one level, it sounds like he would believe in the right to do this, but then at the other way, there is this problem here of opinion and belief that we have to regulate in that sense. We have to control it because it does something. He says, um, therefore, the problem is to regulate the judgment. Whoever judges mores judges honor, and whoever judges honor derives his laws from opinion. Okay, again, so therefore, again, remember, whoever judges mores judges the question of honor, and whoever judges honor derives his laws in this sense, from the opinions, people's beliefs. A people's opinions arise from its constitution. Hmm. It's our beliefs. Our beliefs, our opinions, in other words, our opinions, belief, I would say, in the sense, what we think is true, are things that we hold, believe to be um, arise from the constitution of the people, right? Although the laws does not regulate mores, although the laws is not regular, it is legislation that gives rise to them. So the legislation gives rise to the mores in that sense. When legislation weakens, mores degenerate. But when the judgments of but then the judgments of censors will not be able to do what the force of law has not done. So in other words, again, there's this connection that the censors cannot replace law. Law and mores are connected. You have to have the law strong enough to make sure that the mores, mores and laws are kind of interesting. That although laws does not regulate mores, right, in that sense, it is legislation that gives rise to mores. Mores are basically the way people act. The way people act. This is the social habits. This is the social behavior. This is the outcome of people's behaviors, patterns, and things. And that if we look at the laws, actually, the laws do have impact. In other words, it's cause effect. In other words, the laws and people's, can have impact on the people's behavior. And then what happens is it is the kind of, the constraints or the rules or the cost. It adds the cost and benefits. Therefore, it is the structure. It is the network and structure by which people's actions will operate within and react to. Right, and then what happens is a pattern of behavior. The mores are merely the pattern that people have. That is the pattern that will happen given these sets of cost. These, what the laws and rules say in that sense, or the outcomes of things. In other words, we have a certain set of activities, interactions. There's going to be, cost and benefits, cost and utility. And then the laws are additional levels of cost and utility and things that will allow you to, it adds weights, different weights to it. So therefore it changes. There's the existing net, in other words, that there's family relationships, that there's the relationships between friends and neighbors, and those of the market, and those within the society, and then with those with the laws, right? All these things together have a set of cost, benefits, and norms that allow and also, things that are expected for it to work, customs, norms. Um, and I think this is what, he's trying to get at here in that sense. So he says that, in other words, the laws do not regulate mores. It is legislation that gives rise to them. So when legislation weakens, mores degenerate. But then the judgments of censors will not be able to do what the force of law has not done. So therefore, in other words, censorship is not a solution to bad laws. It can't replace bad laws. In other words, it needs good laws. Laws have to happen. This is maybe a attack on, there's a lot of social conservatives who think that the best way, there's the Robbie Georges and these Catholic conservatives, and sometimes there's neocons who point about, the black family, the father, problem of fatherhood, this, and that, and that it's better than if we just dealt with we shouldn't get government involved. Uh, we shouldn't use law. We shouldn't use government. We should be trying to use private institutions and things like this to shape and reform people. Use the churches. Use this. Well, the problem with that is, Rousseau would say, the problem with that is that, sorry, you need the laws. Without the laws enforcing the rules, if there's no laws enforcing the rules in this sense, that laws don't make opinion. In other words, he says laws don't make mores. The laws don't regulate mores in that sense. regulate mores, but without good laws, what will happen is bad mores will get precedent. It doesn't regulate mores, but it can what? It can regulate people's behavior. It can add punishments that people then don't want to get. It can add costs. I mean, when the law no longer punishes bad behavior, then you get more of it, not less. When the law permits people to break up marriages to dissolve easily, then what will happen? There'll be less marriage, and marriages will dissolve easier. Okay, because what happens is once you have, in other words, if the question of inconvenience happens, if it's easy to get opt out, if it's easy to opt out, if it's not, in other words, if the cost of opting out is low or lower than when the law said you couldn't, then what happens is that those who have in other words, and the benefit of opting out is high, more than the law. In other words, the utility of opting out is higher than the cost of in other words, the cost of staying in versus the cost of opting out is higher, and and the cost of opting out is still lower than the benefit that you get from opting out. Then you opt out, right? That's the logic of that. So you need to have so therefore in other words, if the natural outcome of the cost of opting out is not higher than the utility, then you need to have the laws change it so that the cost of opting out is higher. So therefore, you don't do it. Higher than the benefit of opting out. The cost of opting out is higher. This is what he's saying in that sense. The more if the laws are there, you don't regulate it, and in other words, this was what moderates the mores in that sense. I would argue in that sense. When legislation weakens, the laws are weakened, the mores will degenerate. But at this time, the judgment of sense will not be able to do what the force of laws have not done. Right? It follows from this that censorship can be useful for preserving mores, but never for reestablishing them. So the censor can't restore things. Censorship and restoration cannot restore the mores. Establish censors when the laws are in full vigor, and as soon as the laws have lost it, the situation is desperate. Nothing legitimate has force any longer when the laws no longer have any. So when the laws are not there, then nothing will have force in that sense. Okay. In other words, the censorship will not. In other words, you establish a censor when the laws are in full vigor. He just merely does what? The laws are merely the tools, the existing laws, and he just reasserts and reinforces the mores. But when the situation is lost, censorship is not going to. When the laws, as soon as the laws have lost it, the situation is desperate. Nothing legitimate has any force any longer when the laws no longer have any. Censorship maintains mores by preventing opinions from becoming corrupt. The word censorship maintains mores by preventing opinions from becoming corrupt, by preserving their rectitude through wise application, sometimes even by determining them when they're uncertain. So in other words, this is the limitation of prayer. They are maintained, in other words, censorship maintains mores from corrupting, the mores becoming corrupt. So there's a dominant opinion, but this could be corruption, so you reinforce the dominant mores. The mores that you consider that is like this. You don't allow them to become corrupt. And sometimes even by determining when they are still uncertain. So therefore, they're uncertain, we have some things, therefore we say these are the certain ones. The use of seconds in duels, which became a passion in the Kingdom of France, was abolished there by the following few words in the Edict of the King. As for those who are so cowardly as to call upon seconds. Right? In other words, this judgment, anticipating that of the public, determined it at once. The king shaped opinion. The king said, as those those who, in other words, abolished it, and therefore this shape that only cowards would call seconds, right? So therefore abolished by the few words in an edict of a king, for those who are so cowardly as to call upon seconds. This judgment, anticipating that of the public, determined it at once. But when the same edict tried to proclaim that it was also an act of cowardice to fight duels, which is quite true, but contrary to common opinion, the public scorned its decision upon which its judgment was already formed. In other words, if the people believe that in other words, they believe seconds are cowardly to use seconds, but cowardly to fight duels? No, they believe that. Then to issue that command is to the people opinion. In other words, censorship only works when it conforms to what people believe. Now, if there's a weakness if there's no, in other words, if there's a doubt, it can help confirm what the dominant what is that. But when it is firm in that sense, when there is a clear thing, then asserting it won't make it so. Okay, and he uses the same example of this, right? Just these few words stop seconds, but these, but when he tried to condemn duels itself, it didn't hold. The edict was powerless. I have said elsewhere that since public opinion is not subject to constraint, there must be no vestige of constraint in the tribunal established to represent it. So there's no constraint on it. Since public opinion is not subject to constraint, remember he said elsewhere in that sense, there must be no vestige of constraint to this. Now in this chapter, I merely indicate what I have treated at great length in the letter to Monsieur d'Ambert. This is the famous letter to d'Ambert about this, right? This is where he talks about and this is where, in that famous thing, he talks about the censorship of theater. You know, he compares Paris to Geneva and favors Geneva censorship of theater in that sense. So this is to the letter of d'Ambert, right? So this reminds us to his letter to d'Ambert. The arts with which this mechanism, altogether lost among modern peoples, was set to work among the Romans and better still among the Lacedaemonians, cannot be sufficiently admired. In other words, the moderns don't really, they've been lost. The modern world, the modern peoples, modern mass man, modern society has lost this. The liberal world cannot tolerate it. Okay, but the Romans and the Greeks did. So they did. This was still in mind. It was set to work among the Romans, and the better still among the Lacedaemonians, and cannot be sufficiently admired in that sense. When a man of bad morals offered a good opinion in the council of Sparta, the ephors, taking no notice of it, had a virtuous citizen propose the same opinion. Okay, in other words, they wouldn't listen to bad people. No, but this idea that the ephors would get a good person to repeat what was said. They'd ignore the bad person. A good opinion. In other words, a man of bad morals offered good opinion of a good opinion in the council at Sparta. Right. No, the ephors took no notice of it, and then had a virtuous and imposed the same opinion. What an honor for one! In other words, what an honor for one! What a shaming of the other, without ever having praised or blamed either of the two. In other words, it is both an honor for one and the shaming of the other. Certain drunkards from Samos defiled the tribute of the ephors. They came from another island, which the delicacy of our language prevents me from naming in this context. Right, this is this, and this is 129. This in the copy of the social contract given to Denver, Rousseau noted they were from Chaos, not from Samos. But given the things in question, I never dared use this word in the text, although I think that I am I am as bold as others. It isn't permissible for anyone to be dirty and crude in any possible situation. The French have put such decency in their language that one can no longer tell the truth in it. Rousseau thus avoided the play on words which would have resulted if he had spoken of chiots or chiens. Okay, again, this is you know what chiens mean in French. I just want to make sure I was right. Bitch or son of a bitch, right? If you use the context, like the bitches, or the sons of dogs, sons of bitches. It could have been used in this context. He didn't use the proper name of the city. He said Samos, but the Chio. So therefore, defied by the emperors, right? This bitches and sons of bitches. Two drunkards from the bitches or sons of bitches defile the tributes women. And he says that you can use them in a letter, in the edition that he gave to someone else. As I said, he didn't. The French language doesn't like the delicacy of the French language. Doesn't allow you to tell the truth. So what does he says? The following day, a public edict gave the Samians permission to be filthy. A real punishment would have been less severe than such impunity. When Sparta declared that what is or is not decent, Greece did not contest its judgment. In other words, Sparta, Sparta didn't. The real punishment would have been less severe than such. In other words, the following day, the edict gave the Samatians permission to be filthy. In other words, a real punishment would have been less severe than such impunity that you are this. So when Sparta declared what is or is not decent, Greece did not contest its opinion, its judgments in a sense. That's what the authority of that sense. This is the Spartans kind of gave the. In fact, this is the Spartans often were held to be the ideal in this sense. Even though I would say that I followed Victor David Hansen here, that Sparta is not really it has more problems than it should have. Well, that's it. We'll stop here. We'll finish here. I think we've been long enough. I think it went over an hour. So we'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below, and I'll respond to them when I see them. Like the video if you liked it. Like it. Share it with friends on social media. If you didn't like it, you can always thumbs down it, but say why in the comments. Maybe we can learn. If I did something wrong or something that you can do better. Another thing is subscribe if you're not subscribed. That way you get the notifications that what's new things are out there. And I'd like to grow the channel some. Some size of the channel would be good to have more people as members. We've been getting some subscriptions, but we've also been having, as people leave YouTube or shut off things or have been dormant, the system kind of removes them after a while. So we had a kind of shutting down of people. So every time I gained some, I thought I was going to get. I was hoping to get near the 400. It started to go down. Another thing you can do is you can follow me on social media. The links are below. You can follow also my academic social media links are there to see my scholarship and to see the routines there on the links below the social media links. Then if you want to help me contribute, you want to be a partner with me when I'm doing this thing by being a member, you can do so by becoming through Subscribestar or Patreon. Again, I don't have big membership tiers. So if you that's what's there is there. If you do it, as people say, well, there's not many people there. Why should I join? This is the problem of the empty restaurant, right? I did YouTube too late I should have done this years ago. I've only been here like 2 years now with videos since COVID, right? Mostly started COVID. I had some videos before when I did my book in 2016, but I didn't do regular videos, and it was like irregular. I should have done like even before that, 2000. So, but okay, So that's that. Another thing is you can also help me by you want to help contribute do this. You can buy one of my books. My books are not they're not links below. They're just the books titles, which you can then use online book services, or if you prefer, you can go to your local bookshop and try to order it to that. Well, that's that in that sense. Again, this is we finish next time. We'll finish up Rousseau at the last two chapters, 8 and 9. Then we will look at following this. We'll probably look at political economy, um, political economy in that sense, and then we will see what happens. Again, this is on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursday, Tuesdays and Thursdays are usually right now in Carl Schmitt's dictatorship, which is it's very difficult to get through, like because of the chapters are very longish. It's not as long. It's not as bad as well. It's almost as bad as what happened with Montesquieu in that sense. Not as bad, but it can be. In terms of length. So this has been the divide. And Fridays are always kind of either a live stream or some activity on that thing, either messing around, a monthly live stream, or a book Friday book chat when I can get my mood into it. So that's it. Take care. Bye bye. Have a good day.